I did not know what I was doing the morning. I turned Marin Ashby away from the depot door. I told myself I knew precisely. I was Caspian Vale, Duke of Thornholt, attached to the War Office's Northern Cartography Division for the duration of the Aldenmere Survey, a man who had spent 11 years making decisions at speed and living with their weight. I looked at the woman on the step, her portfolio clutched against her coat, her chin level in the way people hold their chins when they expect to be refused, and I made what I considered a reasonable assessment. She was too young. The work required experience with geodetic notation, not copyist's training. We did not have time to instruct a newcomer. I had 2 surveyors already behind schedule, and a dispatch to the office due before the month's end. I said, "The position has been filled." She said, "I see." Then she picked up the bag she had set at her feet, thanked me, and left. I watched her go because I was standing in the doorway and there was nowhere else to look. She walked across the frozen yard with the same level expression she had maintained throughout. Not wounded, not angry, simply done with me, in the manner of someone who has learned not to waste energy on closed doors. I went back inside and thought nothing more about it. This is what I told myself for approximately 3 weeks. It was my second-in-command, Rowan Chell, who ruined the comfortable lie. Rowan was a lean, deliberate man of 40 who had served with me through the Aldenmere boundary disputes and earned the right to say things I did not invite him to say. He came to my desk on a Tuesday afternoon in November with a roll of corrected survey plates and set them in front of me without preamble. "These came from Ashby," he said. I looked up. "She took a position with the Whitmore Copying House on the High Street," Rowan said. 3 days ago she sent these to the depot under separate cover. She noticed 8 errors in the plates we submitted to the office last month. She corrected them. She did not ask for payment. She did not sign the corrections. I only know it was her because her notation style is recognizable." I looked at the plates. The corrections were made in a fine, precise hand, the kind of precision that comes not from careful effort but from something built so deep it cannot be turned off. She had caught the error in the projection formula on plate 7 that I had myself spent 4 hours looking for and abandoned. She had found it, corrected it, noted the cascading error it had introduced into plates 3 and 12, and corrected those as well. I sat with this for a moment. "Bring her in," I said. Rowan's expression did not change. "I thought you might say that." She arrived the following morning in the same coat, the same portfolio, the same level chin. She stood on the far side of my work table and said nothing while I studied the plates, as though the room and its silence were a condition she had long since made her peace with. I said, "I was mistaken about your qualifications." She said, "Yes, Your Grace, you were." Not unkind, not triumphant, simply accurate the way her corrections on plate 7 were accurate, a fact recorded with economy and no excess. I offered her the position at a rate 30% above the posted figure, because I had already cost her 3 weeks of work by my own error, and I did not intend to compound the error with meanness. She accepted it with a nod and asked when she should begin. I said, "Now if you are willing." She set her portfolio on the end of the work table and opened it and began. This is the part I cannot explain properly, even in retrospect. The depot had been a working room for 11 months, occupied, functional, humming with the low noise of men doing careful things under pressure. But in the hour after Marin Ashby opened her portfolio, the room acquired a different quality. Not quiet exactly, more ordered, as though something that had been slightly misaligned had been corrected without anyone having been told it was crooked. I did not mention this to Rowan. I am not sure I could have found the words. She worked at the depot for 14 weeks before the blizzard winter came. In that time I learned the following things about Marin Ashby, not by asking her. She did not volunteer information about herself, and I did not consider it my place to request it. but by the ordinary accumulation of working beside someone through long hours in a cold building. She had been raised in the lighthouse at Graving on the north coast, where her father had been the keeper for 30 years. This explained the precision. Lighthouse keeping is, at its heart, a discipline of exactness. The wrong angle of a lamp, a smear on the lens, a log entry out of sequence could mean a ship on the rocks. She had grown up understanding that small errors cost lives, and the understanding had shaped her hands and her eyes before she was old enough to know it was shaping her. She drank her tea without sugar, black, very hot. She ate her noon meal at the worktable rather than the common room because she liked to read while she ate, and the common room was too loud for reading. She read, as far as I could tell from the spines that passed through her coat pocket, primarily works of natural philosophy and maritime navigation. Once, a novel. She looked mildly embarrassed when she caught me noticing the novel, which was the only time I saw her composure slip even slightly, and I found that I wanted, unreasonably, I told myself, to reassure her that novels were not something she needed to be embarrassed about. I did not say this. I was a difficult man to work for, and I knew it. I required accuracy at a standard most men in the depot found exhausting. I did not explain my reasoning unless asked, and I did not ask how people were feeling about the work. I had been told, more than once and by people I respected, that I conducted the professional world as though warmth were a resource that cost something I could not afford. Marin Ashby did not find me difficult. Or rather, she found me difficult in exactly the way she found a complex projection formula difficult, which is to say she engaged with the difficulty as a problem to be solved and did not take it personally. When I said a plate was wrong, she did not look stricken. She looked at the plate. This was, I realized gradually, extremely unusual. Most people, when I told them something was wrong, experienced it as a comment on themselves. Marin experienced it as information about the plate. She would nod and return to the table and correct the error and bring the corrected plate back and set it in front of me and wait, not for approval, but for confirmation that the thing was now accurate. It took me approximately 6 weeks to understand that what I felt when she set the corrected plate in front of me was something I had no professional category for. The blizzard came on the 14th of December. It came the way serious weather comes in the north, not with drama but with a steady, grim resolve, as though the sky had made a decision and was carrying it out. By the afternoon, it was clear the storm would not permit anyone to travel, and I sent the depot staff home early with instructions to take what work they could carry. Marin did not have a home to go to, properly speaking. She had lodgings on Callow Lane, which was 3/4 of a mile from the depot across open ground that would, by nightfall, be impassable. She made no comment about this that I heard. She packed her materials with the same economy she did everything and pulled on her coat and walked to the depot door and looked at what the sky was doing. I was behind her. I do not know precisely when I had moved to stand behind her, but there I was. She said, without turning, "I believe I may need to find a room at the inn on the corner." I said, "The inn on the corner closed in September." A pause. She looked at the sky again. I said, "There are rooms at the estate. Thornholt is a 1/4 mile, sheltered road. You are welcome to make use of one until the storm passes." She turned and looked at me then, not with gratitude exactly, more with the expression of someone recalibrating, adjusting their map of a person to account for new information. She said, "Thank you, Your Grace." We walked to Thornholt through the beginning of the blizzard. She did not take my arm because I did not offer it, and she did not need it. She walked through the snow with the same unhurried steadiness she brought to everything. I thought, absurdly, of a lighthouse lamp, the kind that does not gutter because it was built on a principle and not on hope. She stayed 2 nights. We worked both evenings at the library table because we were both the kind of people who find an empty evening harder to manage than a full one. On the second night she found an error in a survey from 1833, 30 years old, an error so long established that it had propagated into 11 subsequent surveys, and no one had ever caught it. She showed it to me quietly, without fanfare, setting the original document and the derivative surveys in front of me in a line so the propagation was visible at a glance. I looked at the line of errors. I looked at her. She said it is not urgent. The boundaries it affects have not been in dispute since 1841. I said, how long did it take you to find it? She said, I noticed something irregular while I was looking for something else, perhaps 20 minutes to confirm it. I said, and I meant it in a way I was not fully prepared for, Miss Ashby, I have had 4 trained surveyors in this depot for 11 months. None of them found this. She looked at the documents rather than at me. She said, they may not have been looking at the 1833 survey. She was giving me a reason the observation was not remarkable. I understood, in that moment, that she did this consistently, found a logical explanation for why the thing she had done was not the extraordinary thing it plainly was. I understood also that she had been doing this her entire life, and that a great many people had been grateful to her for it because it made them comfortable, and that she had paid for their comfort in ways she did not account. I said they should have been looking at the 1833 survey. This is not a failure of your observation. This is a failure of method. She was quiet for a moment, then she said, yes, I suppose it is. And that was all. But something in the room shifted very slightly, the way things shift when a fact that has been private for a long time is finally spoken aloud to someone who receives it accurately. When the storm cleared, she returned to Callow Lane, and I returned to being a difficult man at a work table who did not say unnecessary things. But I had seen, in those 2 evenings at the library table, what it would be like to live in a house where someone found the 1833 error, and I did not know what to do with the knowledge. The answer, I told myself, was nothing. She was a member of the depot staff. I was her employer's liaison with the War Office. The distance between us was architectural, not a rule anyone had written down, but a structure that had been built over a long time by people who understood what chaos followed when structures like it were ignored. I did not cross the distance, but I did, and I am precise about this because I wish to be honest even in recollection, especially in recollection. I did the thing that was available to me. The blizzard returned 3 weeks later. A smaller storm, not enough to close the roads, but enough to make Callow Lane unpleasant at night. I had learned, from a depot messenger who traveled that street daily, that the lantern bracket at the entrance to her lodging house had been broken since October, and the landlord had not repaired it. The path from the gate to the door was 20 yards of unlit gravel. I requisitioned 1 brass lantern from the War Office Supply Depot, a field lantern, enclosed flame, weatherproof, under a discretionary order. I had it delivered to the Callow Lane lodging house with no note. I told myself this was a practical gesture. The path was dark. The lantern solved the problem. It was no different from repairing a fault in the depot roof. I told myself this with complete seriousness, and almost believed it. 3 months later, the Aldenmere survey was complete, the depot was closed, and the staff was dispersed to other postings. I went to the War Office in London. Marin Ashby, as far as I could determine from the office's routing records, took a position with a hydrographic firm in the east of the county. I did not pursue further information. I was not entitled to further information. But the office's routing records passed through my desk in the ordinary course of War Office administration, and the hydrographic firm's work was naval adjacent. And in February of the following year, a posting recommendation came across my desk for 1M. Ashby recommending her transfer to a survey expedition to the Northern Territories. An 18-month posting, harsh conditions, significant professional distinction if she completed it. I sat with the recommendation for 1 afternoon. The expedition was genuine and the distinction was real. I do not want to misrepresent my reasoning as simple protection, because it was not simple, and I am not sure protection is the right word. What I understood, sitting with that recommendation, was that 18 months in the Northern Territories in those conditions would cost her something she did not know she was spending. I had read enough expedition reports to know that what the form called harsh conditions was a particular kind of steady attrition. Cold, isolation, the suppression of everything in you that requires light and warmth to function. I had spent 4 months of my own life in conditions of that kind. I came back functional, and I would make the same decision again, and I would not recommend it to Marin Ashby. I rerouted the recommendation. I substituted a posting with the Office of Coastal Surveys in the South, a position of equivalent distinction, better conditions, work she was made for. I did not tell her I had done this. I was not entitled to tell her. She took the coastal posting. In the year that followed, 3 of her survey corrections were published in the office's official compilation under a departmental heading. Her name was not on them, which was the departmental practice, and I considered, more than once, writing to the head of the office about it, and did not, because it was not my place. But I knew which corrections were hers. I had the originals. In the second year after the depot closed, I stopped receiving routing information that included her name. This was a function of posting. She had moved to a division whose records did not cross my desk. I understood this. I did not request access to her records. I was not entitled to her records. But the absence of the name in the routing files was a different kind of silence than the ordinary silence of my days, and I was honest enough with myself to admit this even if I did not intend to act on it. I had built my life on a principle of cost accounting, understanding what a thing would cost before committing to it, and not committing to things whose cost exceeded what I could sustain. By this accounting, the distance between Marin Ashby and myself had always been too wide to cross without cost to both of us that I was not willing to impose. She deserved a life that moved toward warmth, not toward a man who expressed care anonymously through War Office requisition orders. So I was, in the language of my own internal accounts, even. Whatever I had done, the lantern, the rerouted posting, was discharge of a debt, not accumulation of a claim. I had used my position to briefly redirect something that would have cost her, and the debt was settled, and that was the end of it. I told myself this with complete seriousness, and believed it approximately half the time. The thing I did not anticipate was the dispatch case. It arrived at my desk in the 3rd week of November, in the 3rd year after the depot closed. It had belonged to a senior War Office surveyor named Aldous Pem, who had died the previous spring, and whose effects were being cataloged and redistributed to the relevant divisions. Pem had been a careful man and a thorough one, and his dispatch case contained, among other items, a collection of survey documents that were being returned to the original depot record. The Aldenmere depot record was my record. The case came to me. I did not open it immediately. I had 3 other matters pressing that week, and I set it on the corner of my desk and left it. It was opened, as far as I can reconstruct it, by my administrative clerk on the Tuesday morning when I was at the War Office for a quarterly review. My clerk sorted the contents into the appropriate files and left the case, empty, on my desk. What he did not file, because it was not a survey document, was a single sheet that had become tucked behind the interior lining of the case. He left it on top of the stack with a brief note, "Found loose, not sure where it belongs." I came back from the quarterly review, sat down at my desk, and looked at the sheet. It was a War Office requisition order. Depot Thornholt, dated the 14th of January, 3 years previous. Item: 1 brass enclosed flame field lantern, weatherproof, standard issue. Delivery address: the lodging house on Callow Lane. Authorization seal: Thornholt. Pem had been the depot's administrative liaison for the month of January. He had, evidently, processed the requisition order through his own desk as a routine administrative matter, filed a copy in his personal case records in the way careful men file things, and then died with it still there. I sat with the sheet for a long time. Then I understood. If the sheet had been filed with the depot records, it was now in the divisional archive. If it was in the divisional archive, it was accessible to any staff member with archival clearance. Marin Ashby had archival clearance. She had had it since the coastal posting. It was a standard credential for her grade. I did not know if she had any reason to be in the divisional archive. I did not know if she had ever looked at the Thornholt Depot records. I did not know if, having looked at the Thornholt Depot records, she would look at a 3-year-old requisition order for a brass lantern. I put the sheet in the appropriate file and went back to work. She came on a Thursday afternoon in December, 3 weeks after I had filed the sheet. I heard the housekeeper's voice in the hall, a visitor, unexpected, will your grace see her? And then Marin Ashby's voice, level and quiet, saying she understood if this was not a convenient time. I was at my desk. I said send her in. She came in exactly as she had come into the depot 3 years earlier, coat, the same level composure, something held in both hands instead of a portfolio. It was, I saw, a single sheet of paper. She stood on the far side of my desk and set the sheet on the surface between us and said nothing. I looked at the sheet. It was the requisition order. I looked at her. She said, I am in the archive every Tuesday for the Coastal Survey compilation. I have been reviewing the Thornholt Depot records for a month. I found this 3 Tuesdays ago. A pause. She said, I have been thinking about what to do with it for 3 weeks. I said, and what have you decided? She said, I decided to come and ask you directly, because I am not interested in the version where I know this and you know I know it and we both pretend I don't. I was quiet for a moment. I had built 11 years of professional life on the architecture of not saying things directly. I understood, looking at her, that I was going to say this directly. I said, I sent the lantern. She said, I know. I said, the path to your lodging house was unlit. The landlord had not repaired the bracket. It was a practical matter. She looked at me with an expression I could not entirely read, not accusation, not hurt, something more like careful attention. She said Caspian. It was the first time she had used my name. I understood she was using it deliberately, as a kind of demand for accuracy. She said, was it a practical matter? I was quiet for a long time. Outside, the December light was falling through the library windows in long, low angles across the floor. The house was very still. I said no. She sat down in the chair across from my desk. She did not ask. She simply sat, in the way of someone who has decided the geography of the room is no longer arranged against her. She said, tell me the rest of it. I told her the rest of it. I told it the way I do things without embellishment, in the order it occurred. The posting recommendation, the Northern Territories, what I understood about what 18 months in those conditions would cost. The Coastal Survey substitution, the publications under the departmental heading with no name on them. I told her that I had, at every point, been aware that I was not entitled to any of it, not to the knowledge of her postings, not to the intervention, not to the tracking of her work, that I had used a position of administrative proximity to act on something that was not my business to act on and had dressed it, in my own accounting, as a discharge of obligation rather than what it was. She listened to all of this without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. She said, you rerouted my posting because you were concerned about the conditions. I said yes. She said, without asking me. I said yes, I was aware that was wrong. She said it was wrong. I was qualified for that posting. I said, you were. The coastal posting was also distinguished work, and I believed you would do it well, which you have, but my judgment about what was appropriate for you was not mine to make." She was quiet again. Then she said, "Why did you not simply write to me? Introduce yourself again. Say that you wish to remain in contact." I looked at the requisition sheet on the desk between us. I thought about how to say what was true and settled on the plainest version of it. I said, "Because I did not think I had anything to offer you that would not primarily cost you something." She looked at me steadily. I said, "I am not easy to know. I know this. The depot, you managed me well because managing professional difficulty is a skill you have built over a long time. But a life with me is a different proposition. I am a man who sends a lantern anonymously rather than repair the bracket himself and come to the door. I thought that what you deserved was someone who would come to the door." She looked at me for a long moment. I could not tell what she was calculating. With Marin Ashby there was always a sense of calculation, not coldness, but precision, the same precision that found the error in the 1833 survey, and I had learned not to try to predict the conclusion. She said, "I have been carrying a lantern for 3 years that I could not account for. I carried it with me when I moved to the coastal posting because I did not want to leave it. I could not have told you why." A pause. She said, "I think actually that I knew, not the fact of it, not that it was you, but I knew the lantern was not the act of a practical man solving a practical problem. It was too good a lantern for a practical gesture." I said, "It was the best available from the depot supply." She said, "Yes, that is how I knew." She said this with the small, precise, entirely restrained warmth that was, I understood in that moment, the Marin Ashby version of what other people expressed in much larger gestures. I had been sitting across from it for 14 weeks in the depot and had not known what to call it. I knew now. I said, "Miss Ashby." She said, "Marin." I said, "Marin, I have not come to the door because I have believed sincerely that coming to the door was something you would have to pay for. I want to tell you that I am no longer certain I was right about that I would like the opportunity to be wrong about it, and that I am asking directly, because I understand that you are not interested in the version where we both know something and pretend we don't." She looked at the window for a moment. The December light was almost gone. She said, "You understand that you would need to learn to come to the door." I said, "Yes." She said, "Not to send the lantern and call it practical." I said, "I understand." She said, "I will hold you to that." She picked up her coat from the arm of the chair and stood. Then she set the coat down again and walked to my side of the desk, which I had not anticipated, and she was precise even in this. She did not touch me. She simply stood close enough that the distance between us was no longer the structural distance that had been built over 3 years, but something new, something neither of us had a name for yet. She said quietly, "For what it is worth, the lantern was the right lantern. I have never been afraid of the dark in a way that required a lantern, but I kept it lit every night for 3 years, and I could not tell you why until now." She came to dinner the following Sunday, which was the first time I had ever prepared for a dinner with anything like what I can only describe as anxiety. Not about the food or the arrangements, which my household managed without my involvement, but about the specific and unfamiliar problem of being in a room with someone I wished to know better and not disguising that wish as something practical. I did not disguise it. I was not successful at the other thing either. I asked questions, and she answered them, and she asked questions, and I answered them with more directness than I had managed in the previous 11 years of professional life. And at the end of the evening, when she stood in the hall to leave, she said she had had a very good evening, and I said that I had as well, and then I said, "May I come to the door on Thursday?" She said, "Yes." I said properly, "To the door." She said, "I know what you mean." I came to the door on Thursday. She was not expecting the flowers. They were from the Thornholt greenhouse, winter white, because I had no idea what flowers she preferred and white seemed the safest choice. And I was aware, even as I thought this, that I was again solving a problem when I should have simply brought flowers. And she received them with the small, precise warmth that I was beginning to understand was more than warmth, was something specific and considered and mine. And she said, "White is exactly right." I asked her how she knew white was right. She said she didn't know, but it was. We were married in April, in the small church at the edge of the Thornholt estate, with Rowanchel as witness, and the estate housekeeper weeping at the back in a way she had clearly been suppressing for some months. She kept the lantern. It sits on the library table now, where we work most evenings, she with her survey documents, I with mine, the lamp lit between us. I repaired the bracket on the hall lantern myself the first week she was at the estate, which she noticed without comment, and I understood she was noting it. There are things I have said since that I did not know how to say before her. There are errors I have acknowledged that I would previously have filed under some other category and left uncorrected. The 1833 error is the kind of mistake I spent 11 years attributing to inadequate method. I understand now that some errors are not failures of method, but of willingness to look, and I have been looking more carefully since December. She told me in the spring that the lighthouse at Graven where she grew up was decommissioned when her father died, that the newer lighthouse 3 miles up the coast had made it redundant. I asked if she wished to see it. She said she did not know. She said that it was a strange thing to grieve, a lighthouse, a building whose whole purpose is to make itself unnecessary by doing its work correctly. I said, "I don't think that's strange at all." She looked at me. I said, "The best work is the kind that makes itself unnecessary. That stands for a long time after the lamp is out and the sea is still and there is nothing left to warn against. It was built to hold, and it held, and that is enough." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, very quietly, that she thought that was exactly right. I keep the lantern lit because she asked me to. The wick does not need trimming as often as she trims it. She trims it every evening before we sit down to work, the same way her father trimmed the lighthouse lamp, the same way she does everything, with precision and without sentiment, and with the kind of care that is more permanent than sentiment. I told her once that she did not need to keep trimming it, that the wick was in good repair. She said, "I know it is. I'm not trimming the wick." I said, "What are you doing?" She said, "Keeping the light on." I understood that she meant something beyond the wick, and I did not ask her to explain it, because some things do not require explanation. Some things are enough as they are. She is enough. She has been since a Thursday morning in November when she stood on a depot step with a portfolio and a level chin, exactly enough, and I was the last person in the room to understand it, which is, I think, the correct order of things. The distance I was so certain I could not cross turned out to be the only distance worth crossing. I crossed it with a brass lantern that I called practical, and she called exactly right. That is the whole of it, and it is enough.